Everybody, how are you doing? I am excited to be here this afternoon with some amazing panelists that I know personally that do the work, and I'm glad to talk to them about what they're doing in Memphis and also what we expect to come in the future. So first, I'm starting off with Elizabeth Rouse. She is the president of Arts Memphis and has been doing some amazing work due to COVID, especially around funding. Katyana Dandridge is with Art Up and does a lot around programming and equity and entrepreneurship. And Andrea Morales is amazing, award-winning documentarian, photographer, is always covering what's the story of our communities and who's in it and is in the community when she does this. And I love the way that she's capturing these stories, but also education. She's does work with Ole Miss as an educator. So it's just really cultivating the arts across the pipeline. As most of us know, we are living in 2020, which has been a year, right? It's been both challenging and one that has highly affected our sector of the arts. And Memphis is a city that we are constantly growing. We're going through revitalization. We're a predominantly Black city. And then we also have a lot of grassroots movement happening. The first thing I want to start off with is to ask everybody, what are you working on and what is your organization doing right now? So I'm going to start off with Katyana about what Art Up's up to and a little bit about the organization to start us.
Hi, so Art Up, we are currently based in Memphis, but we have a lot of programming and opportunities for artists and entrepreneurs, not only here, but across the country. We are most known for our award-winning Creative Idea Incubator, which was formerly a community engagement fellowship, where artists are selected to basically undergo a series of professional development and capacity building workshops to learn more about how they can transform their art or even their nonprofit or whatever their project is into a sustainable business or enterprise. So this year we had a North Memphis-based incubator. So we had selected 10 individual business owners from that area to engage in the fellowship and really do all that work to develop their business plan and idea, that they want to use to impact their community in North Memphis. And so as soon as we were about to get started with that, COVID happened. And so the statewide shutdown, the mandate, dictated that we pivoted. So we had to pivot within like a week and turn that entire program, which is in person. A lot of our learning is based in person and trips and things like that, but we had to go completely virtual. So we had those, all those workshops where people learn about, design thinking, marketing, branding. They had to do all of that online, but then we also had that available for free to the public because we felt like, during this time, COVID is so hard on everybody, especially artists. Money is not coming in for everybody like that. So we wanted to do something, to make people feel like they have access to ways to, work on their business or something just to distract them from everything that's going on and to also prepare them for what life is going to be like after we, get over this hurdle. And then we also, over the summer, launched a completely virtual youth-focused version of that same incubator. But this one was shortened, so it was only 3 weeks. And we partnered with the City of Memphis Youth Services Division to get students for that. And so it was a selection of housing insecure students who all had creative ideas that they wanted to turn into businesses. So we helped them along with some Harvard interns that we had over the summer. They facilitated workshops and we got to know the students and help them, think through what kind of ideas they want. And we didn't even explicitly explain to the students, oh, your business has to help your community. But the kids from Memphis care so much about this city that it was kind of like already in their ideas. They're like, I want to do something that helps my neighborhood or my, community. So that's what we've been working on. And so all of that has been, it's been a challenge, but we were prepared to make that move to completely remote operations. And so that's been successful thus far. And so we're just trying to close out the year, keeping all of that going strong and making sure that our resources are still available for the people that we serve.
Yeah, I love that. And you hit on some really key things. I was over here taking notes. We'll come back to them. The ideas around collaboration, entrepreneurship, and where artists fit into that. And then students and youth services and that work with the city sounds really amazing. And I can't wait to talk more about that. Andrea, I'm going to go to you now since we left off with education and you work with Ole Miss. Tell me what you're working on and what's happening.
Yeah, hey, I'm grateful to be here today. So what am I working on? I'm working on a lot, probably too much. I think that a coworker of mine had actually phrased like the sort of like driving energy for me really well while we were in conversation the other day. It's kind of like, how do you keep community alive right now when the sort of public health imperative is asking us to maintain distance for our sort of collective responsibility? It's like this really paradoxical place that we're in where like to keep each other safe, we have to stay apart. And that really kind of disrupts a lot of the work that the arts, I think, more broadly tries to do, which is to try to connect people to one another through both the sort of the nature of collaboration, the nature of education, and also the nature of the impact of the work itself, right? Like good art fills a void in other people, right? Like when it teaches someone else, that's when you feel like you've like done something with the medium that you're producing in. And so that in both my work at the University of Mississippi, where I'm working with documentarians, sort of emerging documentarians who are sort of introducing the idea of field work in a time where field work is highly difficult, really needs an abundance of caution, requires an abundance of caution, working with them and trying to figure out ways to bridge the sort of how to navigate that challenge for people who are just learning how to do it. Yeah. And then also, working with MLK 50 Memphis as a visuals director and trying to take care of people that I collaborate with and take care of the people whose stories we're telling. And then in my own independent work, just trying to figure out how to shift an existing body of work about social movements in Memphis and what it looks like today, and responding to everything that's happened in the last few months. It's been a daunting task, but more than any time, I think previously, it's just really clear that it can't be done alone. So just humbling myself, maintaining authentic and earnest connection with others is a big part of what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And I love that. I've always been a fan of your work because of the authenticity of the stories that you capture and tell. And I would love to come back to us talking a little bit about that emerging documentarian scene and the work you're doing. And I think you said a little bit of it around just the toll that it takes on those that are behind the camera doing that work. And then we can just dive a little bit into the value of that being captured. So it's not just y'all are putting yourself through the stress, but there's this necessity that you need to capture it to write these stories out and tell history and to make change. Elizabeth, I think it's a perfect, not to say that stress is the trigger word to bring me over to you, but you've had a lot on your plate over the last 6 months, Arts Memphis has had to basically pick up a lot around funding and how creatives are getting access to capital. Tell me what Arts Memphis is doing and how you're doing.
Thank you so much, Whitney. It's really great to be on here today with an Arts Memphis board member, Whitney, and with Andrea, who is an Arts Memphis grant recipient, and Katyana, who I like to think started part of her arts administration career back in the office at Arts Memphis when Art Up had office space here. So it's really great to be with you all. And for 57 years, Arts Memphis has supported Memphis by working to support and strengthen our arts sector. And pre-pandemic, we were supporting about 70 different organizations and artists. And in 2020, we provided about $2.8 million to support 60 organizations. But what has changed very quickly and drastically has been our support of individual artists. And so when mid-March hit, we began immediately to focus on the organizations we provide support to and work to quickly get out our unrestricted dollars to them that had already been committed so that they could keep people and begin to navigate through this time. The arts organizations were, of course, the first to shut down and will be the last to fully reopen in person. But the other thing we did almost immediately was partner with Music Export Memphis to start an artist emergency fund. Overnight, hundreds and hundreds of artists in our city lost work, and it was really a wake-up moment for Arts Memphis. And we knew that pre-pandemic, the arts sector helped support more than 6,000 full-time equivalent positions in Memphis. But when we began hearing stories from individuals at the end of March about really what that meant and how so many people in our city were living gig to gig and show to show. And so as we have done for decades, we are a vehicle for different types of funders to support the arts. And so thankfully, we were able to secure some new funding from the Mid-South Coast Regional Response Fund at the Community Foundation, and also a new grant from the Kresge Foundation and some other local funding to start this fund, which is now provided, I would say after next week, probably $400,000 to more than 400 individuals. And so that grant, we thankfully were able to get some CARES funding through the city of Memphis. And so that grant is still open today. And we hope that everybody joining in this webinar will spread the word, because we do have grants open up to $1,000 for individuals in the arts sector who have lost work due to the pandemic. So our work as funder continues, and we're working really hard to be a vehicle for Memphians and those outside of Memphis to support our arts community. But one of the most important things that we've done over the last 7 months or so has been really ramp up our role as a connector and convener for the arts sector. And so every other week we have dozens of arts organizations working together to navigate this time. For instance, this week we'll be meeting with the Shelby County Health Department on Thursday afternoon. Last week we had a conversation on racial equity in the arts and how the arts sector can continue to work to be more accessible to all and equitable. And so that role has been really important. I say all the time that the Memphis Symphony was the first to call me on March 7th and say, what in the world are arts groups thinking about this pandemic thing? And so really starting on March 7th, one of the most inspiring things through all of this has been arts groups coming together and really working together and relying on each other to figure out next steps. So I'll stop there, Whitney, but there's a lot more there we could go into.
Oh, I was taking all the notes. Don't worry. We're going to come back to a bunch of the pointers that you brought up. But I think one of the things people always like to hear about is about something, Elizabeth, you really went into, which was around funding and capital. And I want to pose this question directly to you and Katyana around entrepreneurship and capital and this access to it. What do we have out there right now? and how can artists be using that during COVID? And then, if you're like, hey, we don't have as much, what do we need, right, around funding?
So Arts Memphis has grant opportunities open to 501c3 arts organizations in Shelby County. And so all of those details for anyone interested can be found on artsmemphis.org. Our cornerstone program is Unrestricted Support for Arts Groups, and we provide unrestricted support to organizations of all sizes, of all genres, of all histories. So some have been around 2 years and others have been around more than 100 years. And so we really work to be a way for people to support the arts sector. And so operating support is our priority. But we do have project grants available, our Artsville Communities grants, and as I said earlier, now more funding for individual artists. We know it's not enough, and we're working every day to raise more funds. We have been fortunate to get some funding through the National Endowment for the Arts, CARES funding, and a number of organizations locally have been able to get CARES funding through the state, actually. And so this new city funding to support individual artists was a big deal, and we're hopeful that there might be more things like this to flow through. But, we talk about one of the greatest challenges in Memphis is that pre-pandemic even, organizations were running on really, really thin budgets, and they were doing amazing work on shoestring budgets. And in fact, just only about half of the organizations we support had any form of reserve before March 2020. And so if that tells you anything, that is a huge concern, and it's why funding is so important. I like to think, though, that now, I hate to say that it might take a pandemic for us to realize the arts assets we have here, but I think more and more people are realizing how important the arts sector is to our city and to our lives. And so I'm hopeful that we can really work to raise more supports to create more sustainable, stable organizations.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Katyana, before I jump you in there, Elizabeth, I can't emphasize how much the statement around the pandemic has helped us realize how much of an art asset we have in this city. Yesterday, we had an activation with Archimania in downtown Memphis. Socially distanced, Afro Tents is a performance group that collaborated on that spot of the installation. And people were just walking around, COVID safe, mask on, and they were like, hey, what's happening? Both tourists that were here just staying at hotels, and then locals that were enjoying the riverfront. And the first thing that they were like, oh my gosh, I have missed art so much. I don't know what's happening, but I want to feel and embrace that. So that is such an important statement that you said, that we are discovering art more as an asset. And Katyana, you work with artists that are moving into entrepreneurship. Let's go back to that access to capital question for creatives and entrepreneurship right now.
Yeah, I would agree with you both in saying that, we know that the landscape here in Memphis around funding can be really tight. And then it's even competitive nationally now. We have, all these funding and cuts and everything going on with the National Endowment for the Arts. And, everybody wants a Kresge grant. Everybody wants a Kaufman grant. So it's really tight, but that's kind of where we step in. And I guess a tenet of what we do around capacity building is helping artists understand that essentially they are small business owners, and that grants are great, but they're only a part of your toolkit. So it's not, you don't have to be waiting to stand by, because sometimes, the money just isn't there when you need it. And lots of, great people and organizations are working to change that, like Arts Memphis and others. But, sometimes, like with the pandemic has shown that things happen.
Yeah.
So really it's about, we understand the importance of capital. So, in our fellowship with the entrepreneurs that we've worked with, they always, get some startup funding to help them develop their idea. But really, we try to help people learn the best ways to manage those funds and keep them rolling so that they can continue to, make money from that and be self-sustaining, so that, you can weather events like the pandemic or, even everyday things. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the emphasis on you guys having startup capital for those businesses is so important, because that access to capital is just a constant need. So I think that's just amazing work. Andrea, you fall into that artist creating stories and really a business person at that, because I've seen you all around town photographing things both for private and public for MLK 50. Tell me how this has impacted you as an artist and creative, especially you mentioned working on some documentaries right now. What has that done to the documentary field, the funding aspect of 2020?
So I think both Elizabeth and Katyana have sort of acknowledged this. And so I really want to echo the idea that, like, even previous to the pandemic, being a working artist documentarian in Memphis was extremely difficult. And it required a maneuvering of kind of like diversifying streams of income, right? Like for a long time, I worked at Fox and Hound on Sanderlin Road, in order to make the work I wanted to make and pay off my taxes, like pay off my my light bill, my car note, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've never had the luxury, even though I embody a certain levels of privilege, I haven't had the luxury to ever just focus on my work exclusively. It's always having been like, getting like that funding from Arts Memphis and finding ways to like shoot events here and there or make photos at events here and there. And so all that considered, and even getting this job at the university, which puts me now an hour and a half south of Memphis, where I continue to do all my work, right? Like, but I did this job and I'm so glad I had this job coming into a global pandemic, because now I have health insurance, which a lot of artists in Memphis don't have. A lot of my fellow artists who still have to work those service jobs, are working uninsured. And so I think about all that, I think about how in my privilege, how can I redistribute in the way that organizations and institutions are able to redistribute wealth? Because redistributing wealth is the only way that we're all like, under capitalism, that we can find some sense of a proximity to survival. We can't hoard at this moment, right? Like, so I'm grateful that I had just a couple things going on, in March when all this really hit and became super real. In terms of other people, that didn't have that situation, I'm trying to watch out for the community. It's like back to that same question. It's like, how do we maintain community in a time when we have to be apart, right? Like, it's harder to keep up with how people are doing, and it's harder to be there for everyone, right? When you can't come together and support one another in person. You can't go to the homies art opening, and like throw $20 at like, the bartender and pick up a piece of art on the way out, like you can't do these things right now. And so we're trying to figure out and trying to support and uplift as much as possible. And then, the question about how it's affecting how we do documentary, it's a huge, it's been a huge learning experiment. I hate to speak with any authority about what's right and what's wrong, because I think everyone has to do different things in order to get the work that's necessary done. But I think a big question is like, what's necessary right now? What's worth the risk? And for who are we doing these? Who are we putting ourselves at risk for? As someone who works for different clients, like corporate clients, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this is worth the risk right now. And I can make that distinction because I have a steady job right now. But like, if I was still, making do on tips at the chicken wing place and like the commission that came through, whatever it wanted to, it would be a very different situation.
Man, I always love talking to you, all of you, honestly. And I don't even know what my next question is gonna be, because Andrea like gave me like 15 alley-oops to get through the hoop there. And I think one of the things you touched on a bit was around education and how that's being impacted, how we as patrons can enjoy the arts, but also for those creatives that are currently going through anything from K through 12 to college and graduate MFA programs. Katyana, you talked about the youth services aspect of the programs that y'all have with Art Up. Can you tell me about that in terms of art, its access and accessibility to the community, and why you chose to work with youth to do that?
Yeah, so we kind of operate off the principle that arts and culture is kind of the level playing field. Like everybody, things like biotech, all that other stuff that people tend to have, incubators or cater to entrepreneurs of, like those things are more specialized, but art and creativity and innovation, those things can live in any marginalized community amongst any demographic. And so what we were trying to do in partnership with the city is to, while kids are kind of in this space where they have to be, laser focused on their schoolwork and how things have just changed with virtual education. We also just wanted to make sure that they had the opportunities to, not be completely shut out from different kind of like a professional development, and also just college readiness, life readiness skills, because we didn't exclusively focus on, well, we focus on entrepreneurship, but like I said,
Right.
it's more of like life skills and things to prepare you going forward, and how to kind of get through the pandemic, and focusing on what it's like to build a business from the ideation stage, because we had surveyed students, and over half of them before we even started had not really considered starting their own business, but by the time that we had finished, they felt like they were prepared to be, like, okay, well, I can sell these T-shirts that I make, and we just think that's important to have that kind of program, especially for youth in the city right now, because there's so many programs and things that they can do that have just been like cut out. Like kids are, I think we just really haven't sat with the fact that there's a whole generation of youth that just doesn't have access right now to the things that they quite frankly deserve, because a lot of youth programs have just been put on hold. And so we wanted to make sure that we, encouraged them and kept them, mindful, like you have a future, you have all these things that you can do. So all you just need is kind of like the push, the help, the facilitating to make those things possible.
Yeah, no, those are all really great points. And I saw Andrea shaking her head, and I want to go to her and bring up, you're on the board of Carpenter Art Garden, so you're working and you see youth at play every day. And I know Carpenter Art Garden, as Elizabeth has mentioned, they're one of the many organizations that receives funding from Arts Memphis, and probably have had to pivot during this time. Give me a little perspective as you a board member working within Binghamton and Memphis, about youth and their access to art.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely think that like Katyana got on that point super well. Like that's why I was like, like it is a muscle spasm. I'm like in deep agreement with you, friend, about this. Like, the idea that like this is a once in a century kind of event right now, and it's impacting programs that had been making really hard fought strides in communities like Binghamton, like some of the folks that you're working with, Katyana. It's derailing a lot of really hard fought work that's been done, and that wasn't perfect by any stretch, right? Like, because it is all like a constant work in process, a constant work in learning and unlearning for both like the people who are trying to engage with these communities and the communities themselves. I think it's more so the people that are trying to come in from the outside and do the work that have to do a lot of learning and unlearning, right? To let the community inform them on what they need. And so I want to definitely give a big shout out to like the founder, Erin Harris, and the director of the Carpenter Art Garden, Megan, who have stopped to listen about what the community needs right now, right? Like it used to be, it still is, it still will be after all this public health crisis hopefully resolves itself. It will be an after-school arts program that serves to connect kids to a space of lightness, to connect a young artist to a space of like authoring the things that they contain within themselves and manifesting those things into reality, and hopefully giving them like the confidence in their own vision and voice to do the things that what Katyana and Elizabeth are encouraging through their work. But like right now it's difficult, right? So like what they've done is like they've had to pivot into finding ways to like support kids in their virtual learning, both close and afar. They've had to they've really focused on like the pop-up vegetable gardens that they have, which are really great.
Yeah.
And as a way to just maintain presence and maintain connection, because they employ a lot of people in that community also. And so like they've had to figure out how to like do the government loans to keep supporting this thing that a lot of other, this way of investing in this community that a lot of other places haven't been able to invest and support investment from within the community also, more importantly than from the outside.
Yeah, and I think those are really great points. And you and Katyana really touched on that really well. And in this panel with its heavy title, right, of responsibility of art, we're able to say, okay, education and with youth and even with adults, like how this goes throughout the pipeline of self-care and expression, community connection is all really important. And within that, we're empowering the students to tell stories. But we also have to look at who are we giving access and amplifying the voice to tell the story, right? So I'm trying to lead us now in the last little bit before we have our Q&A session is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. The lovely DEI letters that all of us have seen everywhere, right? Everyone is now doing DEI work. But I want to know what that work really is. What is the work that we have to do? Not just as Memphis, right? But probably as an entire arts sector. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you first from the Arts Memphis side. What is in store for DEI? What does that mean? And where are we going with that?
Yeah, thank you, Whitney. Now, before I go there, I have to point out that I have my Carpenter Art Garden art behind me. That was not intentional, but it's office. So, the arts sector, the arts in general have historically, while Memphis is known around the world for our music and for our arts community, the arts sector in Memphis and across our country have historically not been equitable and not been accessible. And so just like cities across the country, pre-pandemic even, we were in much conversation and beginning more work to make sure at Arts Memphis, that an organization that was, by the way, founded in 1963 and has for a long time supported larger white-led legacy arts institutions. We have really worked over the last 4 years to open up our grant making to make sure that we are funding organizations of all sizes and really, most importantly, that we are funding organizations that are providing arts experiences that are accessible to all Memphians and everyone in Shelby County. And so we have worked to change our guidelines, but also to change our process and make our funding more accessible to organizations that may not have an employee responsible for grant making and may not have a full staff of people to work through our process, but yet they're really doing the work every day on the ground. And so a lot of it is about process and about communicating in new ways and involving other, new people so that they can help spread the word about opportunities. But I think I'll just share this and then turn it to the next person. I was on a call on Friday with, I had this great chance to have a lunchtime call with 3 of the fellows of the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. And the fellows are students at the University of Memphis, and they have this really unique fellowship where they are part of the Memphis Symphony, and the fellowship is grounded in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Katie, one of the fellows, I hope she doesn't mind me calling her out in this talk, but
too late.
Forgive me, Katie. But she sort of shared at the end about, she said there are these kind of fellowships all over, and symphonies across the country are, say that they're doing DEI work. But she said what's different is in Memphis, there is this fellowship, but also the Memphis Symphony Orchestra has implemented through their own hiring practices of their assistant conductor, for example, the importance of hiring a diverse staff and a diverse group of artists, and that's really what's going to bring about change. And I think we're fortunate to have an organization in Memphis like that has been able to launch this fellowship and really work to have more musicians of color leading the orchestra. And we know we all have a long way to go. And I say that recognizing Arts Memphis has a long way to go too. But I really appreciated Katie's comment, because she said, we can talk all day, but until we are hiring and building up leaders of color and artists of color, we're not really going to get anywhere. So.
Yeah, I love that. And my comment before I let either one of the two of you guys take it away, y'all are both so brilliant. Elizabeth, the work you're doing at Arts Memphis is important because of the fact that what you just explained to us was how we have to treat the entire system, right? Everything from where that funding is going for a nonprofit organization all the way down to who we're employing at those organizations, because the fellows program's not effective if we don't see it kind of going on to that next step of building it more. We see high turnover in staffing. Something might tell me there's a red flag. Katyana, what are your thoughts on this and diversity, equity, and inclusion right now in Memphis and outside of Memphis?
I think in general right now is, a really obviously very hot topic, and a lot of people are, paying more attention to it and trying their best, but it's kind of, it's going to be a longer process than I think most people anticipate, because when you think about it, diversity, equity, and inclusion is like undoing, tons and tons of work that's already taken place. But I think that Memphis has been making some good strides because there are organizations that kind of have diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of baked into what it is that they're doing. And ArtUp, we pride ourselves on being one of those types of organizations, and we like to work with people from communities who feel like they've been, underrepresented or historically have not necessarily had a seat at the table, with grant makers, funders, larger organizations. And so I think diversity means kind of like, intentionally having basic representation of people from different backgrounds, but then so diversity is a little bit of the easy part of it. But then when you get to inclusion and then equity is kind of where the real work happens, because it's all about intentionality, and inclusion, means that people are actually given the chance to voice their needs, their concerns, and you're letting, if you're an arts administrator or working with a particular community around, revitalization or economic growth, you have to put yourself in the position to be a listener, to be a learner, and to obviously, be open-minded and ready to take in the thoughts, views, and opinions of what, people in Memphis and around the country in different communities, what they need and what they want. So it's really, on us to be the listeners and the practitioners and use our resources to the best of our abilities to take, that from the level of diversity to inclusion and then ultimately equity, which is where the real transfer of power happens. And people feel like they have the agency, or they are given the agency to, make decisions for themselves, and come together and, make decisions for what they feel like, could help us turn into the best city that we can be, or the best art sector that we can have. Yeah.
You hit that answer out of the park, and the intentionality around equity, right? I think everything you said around that is important. Andrea, do you have anything to add to that around the work as we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the pipeline and system for artists in the creative sector of Memphis?
Yes. Yeah, I have a lot of feelings. I will keep it brief though. I mean, like, I will say, great. No, I'm 36 years old, you know, moved to this country in 89, like generationally, I feel like I came right into this kind of like really clumsy period about what diversifying, you know, like my adult life has been marked by being a diversity hire or being a diversity recipient, even though my complexion is this. And I know moving to Memphis made me keenly, sharply aware of that this is not really diversity, right? When in a majority Black city, there are still Black folks being kept out of like the resources, kept being distanced from resources and support and agency. Or no, not agency. They've always had their agency. And so like when I think about the ideas of the way that, you know, present company excluded diversity, equity, and inclusion look like in a lot of other spaces, I get a little frustrated because there's the assumption that, and I'm totally cribbing from a text I read recently, but like, and I have notes, because there's the assumption that whiteness is the norm. There is the idea that racial diversity is the goal without the analysis about what racial diversity actually means or what the lack of diversity, what harm that has caused. I think that there's also the idea that even when those diverse voices and experiences and talents are included, the white voices are still held in higher esteem. Mm-hmm. Then what does it mean to have meaningful inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and people of color? And I think the biggest one for me, consistently as an I statement, the one I've experienced the most, that has been a shortcoming of these kind of attempts, has been when you include these folks and you set them up to fail by not addressing toxic and hostile cultures within these organizations. That's the one that like has made me really jaded, and made me really kind of a little bit, I guess, more radical around the ideas of like what it means to really like shift a culture. Yeah, so I just so like to sort of round it out into something more meaningful and like real. I mean, like when I see what the collective is doing, it's like that's the thing that I want to see. You know, it's like the seat at the table, as Solange has taught all of us, is maybe not enough sometimes, right? Like the table kind of needs to be flipped over, and finding ways to support. And I think Art Up did that also. You know, I think that Art Up like is something that is a flipping of a table. I deeply respect the work that Arts Memphis does, obviously. But like, yeah, like as Elizabeth said, like there's a lot of like inner work going on, and I'm just excited to constantly see that come to fruition. But yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I have to get that. I saw you reading the notes, so I'm gonna have to get the 1, 2, 3. I don't know if I want that on a shirt first or what, but I think those are some important points. I raised my hand in the Southern praise Jesus, we're in church, you could preach for 20 more minutes if we put the choir on type praise, because you were really, really cutting into the deepness of the work that we have to do, which all of you have touched on. And that last point, right, around we have to be able to look inside as organizations, no matter who's leading it, because we know that there are some institutions led by people of color that are still in a very toxic hiring practices, whether it's relating to LGBT community, trans community, women in the workplace. immigrant community. We still see there's so much work that needs to be done. So you hit it right out of the park. All three of you really did. I think we could probably have an entire other discussion just diving more and more into the deepness of this. So the first question was been popped on the screen is, what all are you excited to see in Memphis with so many pivots happening? I'll let anyone take that one because that one kind of got thrown up there.
I'm happy to take it. I've really been so excited about how Memphis artists and arts leaders are working together in new ways. But I heard an analogy a few months ago that's really stuck with me. And it said that the person said that, so I can't take credit for this, but the person said that in the sports world, every sporting event is created for both an in-person audience and a TV broadcast audience. And in the arts world, so much, is about that in-person experience. And so I think arts organizations and artists have this huge opportunity that we've been forced to dip our toe in, to really think about how our arts experiences continue virtually or outside of an auditorium post-pandemic. And so I'm excited to see what local artists and how organizations continue with this technology after we take a little break from Zoom and are ready for that.
Perfect. And what do you think, Katyana, Andrea? What are you excited to see in Memphis with so many pivots happening?
I would agree in that. I think I'm excited to see the different ways that people have continued to show off their skill, their art, their ideas. We've seen a lot of people really hit the ground running with how they've, modify how they do business, how they're able to show their art since, in-person events and exhibitions and things like that have been drastically limited. But I'm also excited to see, the level of collaboration that can come out of all of this. In Memphis, we pride ourselves on being grind city. We say we're hustlers, we're go-getters. And we also, our community, everybody in Memphis has their own thing going on. But I think, when the going gets tough, we know what it's like to be able to come together and work together, because I think it's going to be so important to see how we come out on the other side of this, because it's going to be indicative of how strong we are as a city and as a community, of how we treat our artists and, our most vulnerable people right now. So, I'm excited to see the ways that people have been able to continue what they were doing, pre-pandemic, but also making sure that we really stand kind of as a united front in all of this, because if we weren't on an equal playing field before, this pandemic has cut a lot of people down. So we're kind of starting. We have a chance to kind of start at the same place. So it could be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. So it is unfortunate, but I think I'm excited to see kind of a renewed sense of spirit and, how we come out of this and how we look to arts as the soul of this city.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to see this energy maintaining, right? Like everyone's, May came around, things got real bleak. People were all of a sudden being like, oh, look at all these like Black folks that I work with. Like, this is my friend right here. This is like my brown friend right here. I want to see that energy be real and like manifested into perpetuity. Let's be honest about what Memphis is and what Memphis is not. Okay. Right. Like, I love that allusion to what grind city and grit. Like, listen, I'm all for the Grizz. I love going to a Grizz game, but like, we know that those are euphemisms for a certain kind of resilience that was born out of oppression, okay, out of going without. And I think that we're done going without, right? This has kicked all of our asses asymmetrically, I do think, right? But it has kicked all of our asses, like some of us more than others. Some of us are still going to brunch on South Main, but that's okay. I hope y'all are doing it safe. But yeah, like I do think that I just want this energy to maintain around like a collective resilience. around the fact that we're all being forced to pivot.
Everything you guys said is or women. I love the fact that we're on a panel of all women. I didn't actually notice that, even though I know I'm the one that helped put the panel together. Didn't realize that it was all women and how empowering that is. I'm excited about the collaboration. I'm excited to see the work that all of you all are doing continue throughout 20 and into 2021. I am so thankful to be on this panel with all of you. Thank you, Katyana. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us. If anyone wants to learn more about them, please go to memphisartanddesignweek.org. You can find out about their organizations. You can follow them online. And we continue this discussion throughout Memphis Art and Design Week with more panels talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as education and social justice. With that, I'm going to say thank you guys for letting us go a little bit over time, but the discussion was so good. Thank you all, and y'all have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you, Whitney. See you.